Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas on Friday, April the 18th. And welcome to our commentary. Of course, this is Good Friday, the beginning of the Easter weekend. So I want to wish everybody a very good Friday. And of course, I hope you have a very joyous Easter Sunday. You know, this time of the year always reminds me of when I was a kid in Cuba and just how different we celebrated this stuff. And as I remember Good Friday as a little boy, it was a very solemn day, and everybody was kind of like, very quiet, and you didn't have a lot of radio on, a lot of music on. And it was very, very solemn, really, Good Friday. And then, of course, Easter Sunday, or what we used to call Day of Resurrection, was a huge event. That's when there was a lot of happiness, if you will. We called it Day of Resurrection, the day, of course, that Christ rose from the dead. So it was just a great memory that I have. In fact, the very first time that we came to the United States, the very first Easter week that we had in the United States, the very first Good Friday, I'll never forget, they had a baseball game. And my mother couldn't believe it. She said, "Oh, you mean they play baseball here on Good Friday?" And I said, "Yeah, they do. Yeah, they do. They play Good Friday, or they play baseball on Good Friday." And she just couldn't believe it. She just couldn't believe it. She had always, especially my mom, growing up in a small town in Cuba, Ciego de Avila, a very, conservative Catholic celebration of Holy Week. She just couldn't believe that they'd be playing baseball on Good Friday. But of course, they did here. And so that was kind of, adjusting to the new country. That was one of the things that we had to adjust to. But, great weekend for us Christians as we remember, of course, the resurrection of Jesus Christ on Sunday, Easter Sunday. And usually that's you get together, you have dinner or lunch, or kind of tough to get a restaurant for brunch on Easter Sunday, but that's what a lot of people do, or get together with their families. Another thing too that was a bit of a surprise to me when I first came to the United States was that on Easter Sunday you had these women wearing all these hats, and that again that was that was not what we used to do. And it was really interesting to learn these things about the new country that we had moved to. So anyway, happy Good Friday, and I hope all of you have a very joyous Easter Sunday. Sunday night, we'll be talking to our friend George Rodriguez, and we'll get back to more political things on Sunday night. A couple of things. I have a post over at the American Thinker today talking about this man in El Salvador and the U.S. Senator. They finally met. There's some pictures of the internet of the two of them meeting. Why this thing is such a big deal for the Democrats, it just amazes me. But the only thing I can think of is they have to oppose Trump. But they've created all this hysteria about due process. This guy was given due process. He had a letter from a judge deporting him. I don't know how much more due process you want than that. I mean, I don't know. Well, what is he supposed to get? A trial in the Supreme Court? I mean, that's why we have immigration judges. They look at your case and they write a letter one way or the other. And in this case, he was given a deportation letter. Now, his fear was that he didn't want to go back home because he was afraid that one group was going to kill him or something. Look, that may be totally legitimate. I don't know enough about it to say yes or no. It's like the other stuff about domestic violence. That obviously doesn't make him look good. And then you have I think, a real troubling story that came out that he was stopped in Tennessee driving without a license with something like 8 people in the car who allegedly he was trafficking. The Biden administration decided not to do anything about it. They should have deported him at that moment. That would have been the appropriate time to arrest him and deport him, but they chose not to. And now here we are. This guy has become the new hero of the Democrat Party. It's kind of hard to believe, but that is what this is all about. It looks like he's going to stay in El Salvador because the country of El Salvador is not planning to release him, so he's going to be down there. and that's about all we can say. All we can say about it. Even if the Supreme Court were to tell President Trump to bring him back, he still would have to call the president of El Salvador and get him to agree to it. I mean, I don't know. Maybe he could get him to bring him back if he put some pressure on the president of El Salvador. But for the moment, I think that man is staying down there, and he's going to stay down there for the time being. That's all I can say. But once upon a time, this was exactly the kind of guy that, or the kind of case that would have gotten you deported under President Obama. President Obama deported many people, 3 million of them. And many of the deportations had to do with cases like this, where you had a letter from a judge deporting you. And for some reason, it just didn't happen here, but it finally did happen under the Trump administration. I think the message that the Trump administration is sending out is, hey, look, we're going to start deporting people. And that's the message. I think that's a clear message from the Trump administration. I've got a post coming out Saturday morning about school choice. School choice has come to Texas. We will be having school choice as soon as the governor signs it. It'll go into effect. When exactly that happens, I don't know. I don't know if there's a timetable for that. I'm not sure, but it'll probably happen by the summer, so it can be in effect, or maybe before that. So it can be in effect for the new school calendar year, starting in August. But I like the move. I think school choice is something that I've been calling for quite some time. The people opposed to school choice, a lot of Democrats who don't like it. It has more to do with the teachers union than anything else. They say that this is going to help the millionaires. Well, first of all, the millionaires already have their kids in private schools. If you're a millionaire and you're living in one of the nice areas of Texas, you're already sending your kids to private schools. So you're not impacted one way or the other by this. The people who are impacted are low-income Hispanics and low-income Blacks who are stuck in these bad public schools. And I think they should get a chance to take their kids out of there and put them in a school where these kids have a chance to succeed. They don't have that chance, unfortunately, in our public education today. And that's just the reality of it. So I'm very happy that school choice has come to Texas and that we will be a school choice state very soon. And you've got to congratulate, and I mentioned that in my post tomorrow, Saturday. You have to congratulate the governor because he went out of his way to make sure that every Republican who opposed school choice the last time, there were like 7 of them. They put a primary opponent and they took out most of these people in the primaries. So when the election was over on November 2024, the state election that is, he had the votes in the House that he didn't have before. Now, a lot of the Republicans who were opposed to school choice, they liked the idea of school choice, but they were somewhat connected to their school and in their cities or wherever. And I understand that part of it. But the reality is that the party wants school choice. And if you're a Republican and you're opposed to school choice, I don't know. That's not a good place to be. So school choice is coming. And I congratulate Governor Abbott for working on this and getting it done. I think it was a very big step in his tenure as governor. Ukraine versus Russia is still going on out there. I support Ukraine, always have. It was Russia who invaded. That's clear. But Ukraine cannot win this war by themselves. And the Russians are also losing a lot, but they have more to lose. That's the difference. Ukraine is a small country. They're 40 million people. They're fighting a country of 200 million people. And obviously, Putin can lose a lot more soldiers than Zelensky and Ukraine can. And that's the reality of this. We're not going to get involved in Ukraine, meaning U.S. troops are not fighting for Ukraine. So, look, Ukraine has to settle this. And you got to put pressure on the Russians. If you got to put sanctions on them, you got to do that. But this war has to stop. No one's winning this war. And no one is benefiting. Ukraine is not benefiting. Russia is not benefiting. But again, Russia has more to lose because they're bigger and they can lose a lot more troops than they have already. Now, there may be a limit to that from what I'm reading between the lines, that there's a lot of dissatisfaction in Russia with this war. But for the time being, there's not going to be a military solution to this war. So sending them more weapons, it makes us feel good, like we're supporting them, but it doesn't fix the problem because Ukraine cannot win this war against the Soviet Union or Russia. It's simply not going to happen. So they got to get something done. They got to get a deal done here. And I appreciate the Secretary of State. I think he went to Europe with that message. And we got to get to Putin. If we have to do sanctions, let's do it. But we have to get to him. We remember this weekend, this Easter weekend, 1942. I'm not sure if it was Easter 1942, but it was this day, April 18th, 1942. And this was the day of the Doolittle raid back in World War II. After Pearl Harbor happened in December of 1941, the United States had to regroup. We were completely unprepared for this war. That's just the reality. And the country wanted to do something. The country wanted to see somebody, they wanted to see the country punch back any way we could. And that became the Doolittle raid, where you had these airplanes take off from different aircraft carriers in the Pacific, and they attacked parts of Japan and the Philippines and China and so on. And it was, it was more of a psychological thing than anything else, because I don't think it mattered that much militarily. But it was something the country needed to see. The country needed to see the United States fight back. And that's what the Doolittle raid was all about. By the way, speaking of the Doolittle raid, if you go to my blog, I have a podcast that I did with Barry Jacobson years ago talking about this raid. And again, it was not a huge military activity, but it was psychological. The country had to do something. The country had to punch back. And that's what the Doolittle raid was all about. Doolittle, of course, was the man in charge of the operation. So great story, the Doolittle raid on this day in 1942. Happy Good Friday. Happy Easter Sunday. And we'll talk to you later. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas.